Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fifth session of Civic Dialogues. We are so happy to have you here today. And while we're getting logged in and everyone's loading in the room, could you take a moment to open the URL that is in the chat room? And Rebecca's going to be posting that right now. You'll see this screen. This is our agenda for our second hour together, but we would love for you to scroll down to page 2 here and just sign in with your name and your campus. Just get a sense of who's with us today. Just going to take a few minutes to open this document that you see on my screen. The URL is in the chat. And if you have any trouble, please message us and we'll be sure to get you that. You don't see the URL? Okay, here it is again. And if you can just open it, and we'd love to have you just type your name in here and your campus and role. So your campus, and are you a faculty member? Are you administrator? Do you work somewhere else, another capacity on campus? Still no link in the chat. Okay.
Huh. Oh, hold on.
I'm gonna try it again. Sorry, could be on something on our end. Do you see it now? Oh, it's in the waiting room, I think. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're
now
welcome.
Open. Okay, nice. I see folks loading in. Okay, good. See, this is always good to give a minute or two to get some of this worked out. So if you just log in and scroll to page 2 and just put your first name in your campus role, we can kind of see that happening. And then, you know, after, if you're able to stay with us for the second hour, we're going to ask you to fill in a comment or something that stood out or got you thinking, raised a question or a concern that was surfaced in today's talk. So you could even keep this screen open, put it next to your Zoom, and as things hit you during our first hour, you can just load in to that last column here, and that would be really great to prep us for that second hour. But whether you're staying with us for the second hour or not, we would really love for you to just sign in and give us your first name and your campus role. I'm happy if you want to put your last name as well. That's fine. So folks know how to reach you. If you're having any kind of technical problems, please feel free to just put that in the chat. And give about another 30 seconds for folks if anyone needs the link or is having trouble. No? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing, but do continue to sign in. And I'm going to turn this over to Patty Robinson, who's going to formally introduce our speaker today. And for those of you who are just joining us, let me introduce myself. I'm Kimberly Rosenfeld. I teach at Cerritos Community College. I am in the Communications Studies Department, and I also am the department chair in the Education Department. I'm working on this initiative with Patty Robinson, and who you're going to meet in a moment, from College of the Canyons, and Jan Connell, who is also a retiree from Cerritos College, but hopefully will be joining us at some point today, but is in counseling appointments as she continues to do her work part-time for us. And she's also a 3CSN coordinator. And all of our names and contact information are on the first page of this collaborative document. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Patty Robinson.
Hello, everyone. Many of you remember me if you've attended the sessions earlier. If this is your first time here today, we really are happy you're here. My name is Patty Robinson. I am the Faculty Director of Civic and Community Engagement at College of the Canyons. And I've had the extreme pleasure of working with both Kimberly and Jan on a Bringing Theory to Practice grant. And that's actually how this particular series came about. We also were doing this in collaboration with Cal State Northridge and Cal State Dominguez Hills. And I also want to give a shout out to Rebecca from 3CSN and the wonderful folks from 3CSN who have been able to really make this happen with regard to all of the tech issues and knowledge. So thank you. Well, with that, as Kimberly said, we are into our fifth dialogue. I cannot believe we're already at the fifth dialogue out of 7. The series has been just amazing, more than anything we could have imagined. And again, as I've mentioned and Kimberly's mentioned and Jan, we hope to take many of the ideas that you've come up with, those areas of interest, and look at spring and to see what we can build for our spring dialogue series. But today we are so incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Dawn Whitehead from AAC&U joining us. I have seen Dr. Whitehead present a couple of times. I've had that pleasure. I was actually in a workshop with her, with Karen McTighe-Musil, when they came out to Cal State LA. I think it was in the latter part of January. It was fantastic. And again, I'm so excited to have her here today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and read her formal bio and then turn it over to Dr. Whitehead. So Dawn Michelle Whitehead is the Vice President of the Office of Global Citizenship for Campus Community and Careers at the Association of American Colleges and Universities, or AAC&U. Her work focuses on advancing practices and strategies to integrate global and experiential learning across curricular and co-curricular initiatives, general education, and the majors within professional schools and on campus and off-campus experiences. She also works closely with institutions to embed high-impact practices in integrative learning with an emphasis on quality and equitable participation. Dr. Whitehead has presented nationally and internationally on global learning, civic engagement, community-based global learning, curricular change, experiential learning, global health, liberal education, integrative learning, and strategic planning. She has also written articles on these topics and facilitated grant-funded projects to advance student success through curricular change. She is also the director of AAC&U's Institute on Integrative Learning and Signature Work. Prior to her work at AAC&U, Dr. Whitehead served as the Director for Curriculum Internationalization, as a faculty director for Global Service Learning Programs in Costa Rica, Ghana, Kenya, and the Kingdom of Swaziland, and taught global and international studies courses at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Dr. Whitehead earned her PhD at Indiana University, Bloomington in Education Policy Studies with a doctoral minor in International and Comparative Education and a concentration in African Studies. And don't ask her about basketball because you guys will lose. This woman is an expert in basketball. So she's laughing. So if you have a question, you're going to ask Dr. Whitehead. So with that, Dr. Whitehead, take it away.
Thank you so much, Patty. I always chuckle with the introductions because I feel like I worked at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, which at one point was an answer on Jeopardy for the longest institutional name. And then the titles we have at AAC&U are very, very long too. So I always kind of chuckle and think, oh, they're very long. So thank you for that warm introduction. And we can talk basketball at another time. But first, I do want to thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the Civic Dialogue series. I was delighted to be a part of this. I've seen some of the others who you're working with, and they're people who I admire, look up to, like, and love collaborating with. So I'm glad to be here. The way I would like to structure my time with you today, I don't know if many of you are familiar, but there's a program, a radio program, that comes out of Boston, WBUR, which is called Only a Game. And one thing, Bill, oh good, I see some nods. So Bill Littlefield, when he was the host, one of the changes he made was to add something called 3 Stories You Should Know. And so he invited, different journalists, sometimes academics, to come, and each person, there were 3 of them, would share a story. So what I want to do today in talking about integrative learning and global awareness is divide this into 3 stories, if you will. And I want to start with what is integrative learning. And to get to integrative learning, I also think it's important that we look at what's happening in the world and what's happening in our country, what's happening in our communities. So I want to share a few data points that connect to integrative learning and get your feedback. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you periodically to put comments in the chat, responses to different questions. And I want to begin with a bit of data that was found that came out about a month ago from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Okay, so now you should be able to see my screen. So the Chicago Council on Global Affairs did a survey where they were asking Americans, so this is limited to the US, their thoughts on what were the top critical threats to the United States. And so these 7 fell in the top for all of those who responded. So foreign interference in the US election, the COVID-19 pandemic, international terrorism, domestic violent extremism, a global economic downturn, the development of China as a world power, and political polarization in the US. And they broke this down based on a number of factors. But if you could just in the chat put what you would say are your top 1 or 2 from your perspective right now. If you could just in the chat go ahead and type what you would say are the 1 or 2 top threats to the USA today. I want to just get an idea of what you are thinking today. So feel free to type it in. And we'll see, okay, political. So we're seeing some similarities already with our very small sample so far. Okay, so political polarization. Okay, COVID-19. Thank you, Marjorie. Okay, domestic racism, racial injustice, thank you. Okay, COVID-19 political, okay. The choice to deny science and evidence-based living. Okay, all of them are serious. Yeah, many have said that. Racial injustice, COVID-19, okay, political interference in the election. Want to give a few other people a couple of minutes. Okay, domestic violence, civil ignorance. Okay, poverty, excellent, because it connects to all of these. Inequality, equity, racial injustice, thank you. And I'll just give another second for a few others to respond. Okay, racial, child abuse, COVID-19. Focus on self over community. Okay, definitely not speaking up, not speaking out. Domestic violent extremism, thank you. Okay, foreign interference in domestic, okay, perfect. Climate change, okay, me versus we, fear of speaking out, thank you. These are all very helpful. So what I want to show you next, thank you for sharing what you're thinking as well. What I want to show you next are what they found from the Chicago Council. And what they found is overall, you can see the green is just generally what the numbers were. Then of course, like many surveys and studies do today, they broke it down politically. So they looked at what Republicans said, Democrats said, independents. But I want you to take a look at the overall. The COVID-19 was something that overall everyone said was a top threat. Democrats also had it higher even than the average. Independents had it as number 1. Second, domestic violent extremism. That was only second overall. You see that. Third, development of China as a world power. Fourth, global economic downturn. 5, political polarization, and the others. And I share this because on the one thing that's really critical is, yes, we all may see these threats differently, but if we do not have an opportunity to challenge our students to apply what they have learned to these issues, they will not be ready to have these conversations or engage meaningfully in their communities when these issues come up. Because when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, it doesn't belong to a single discipline. It doesn't belong to a single country. It doesn't belong to a single institution. And students have to be prepared to integrate what they're learning across the board. The same thing when we talk about climate change. Yes, we should listen to the science, but you also have to take other disciplinary perspectives and apply other dimensions to it. Now, the second one that I want to show you is about cooperation. And again, cooperation is also something that is a part of integrative learning. And so with this out of Pew that came out in March this year, the participants were asked, in what areas is cooperation with other countries particularly important? And you can see the top one was the spread of infectious disease, so 86%. That was followed by terrorism, which some of you cited, domestic and international. They just said terrorism broadly, nuclear weapons, cyber attacks, global climate change, so an issue that you raised, poverty, global economy, large migration, and longstanding conflicts between countries or ethnic groups. So that is what many people said. So I always like to just look at some of those and think about what the implications and what the connections are to integrative learning and why this is even more important for students today than ever before. So with that, I'm going to ask you to go in the chat again. And when you hear the word integrative learning, what do you think of? So just in the chat, write down what you think of when someone says, today we're going to have a workshop on integrative learning. What does that mean? Okay. Okay, humanities and diversification, thank you. Inclusive, not siloed, excellent. Engagement with the community, multi-perspective. Good question. Pia, the survey was done before the kidnap. Okay, global, pulling from various sources and synthesizing. Okay, global, oh, Martha, you're after my heart. Yes, global learning is the epitome of integrative learning. Okay, transferring ideas, interdisciplinary thinking, openness to hear other perspectives, excellent. Connecting with and embedding the content, excellent. Connections across disciplines, excellent. And so you were all no input, I don't know. So I think we're in a very good place. So infusing perspectives from various disciplines, using a critical mind, hands-on, worldwide, inclusive. Okay, thank you. And Hannah, we're gonna get a response. We're gonna share some things that will help with that. And I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about integrative learning is people say, what is it? You know, we think we know what it means, but we don't. And it's absolutely critical that as institutions, we have a common shared understanding of what integrative learning is before we can advance the work and ask our students to do the work. So I want to share a definition, and this will be on a handout that'll be shared with you. And integrative learning is an understanding and a disposition that a student builds across the curriculum and the co-curriculum, from making simple connections among ideas and experiences to synthesizing and transferring knowledge to new complex situations within and beyond the campus. So the elements that you all described were spot on when you think about what integrative learning is. And it is indeed, some would argue, one of the biggest challenges for higher education to help students understand that there are connections between the work that they're doing, connections to their communities, and connections outside the classroom. So if we are able to help students integrate that learning over the courses in a single year, over time during their educational experience at your institutions, and between campus and community life, we are really preparing students for their next phase of life in work, in citizenship, and as just a good person, good member of society. So what it does is it pushes us beyond the academic boundaries and disciplinary boundaries, and it shifts the focus, as somebody wrote in the chat, from the classroom to a broader landscape where learning can take place in many different areas and at many different times. And this activation occurs when we have students look at real world problems that are unscripted, so there isn't a single answer, and that are broad, and that they require multiple modes of knowledge, so that a student can't say, I'm only going to use what I know in biology, I'm only using what I know in health sciences, but where students are really challenged to use their knowledge across the board. So integrative learning involves multiple solutions, benefits from multiple perspectives, and there isn't a single answer that we are seeking in our students. And the result is that we change our students. We change their way of thinking. We shift students into thinking about growth as an important part of their confidence as a student. Students start thinking more about becoming lifelong learners because you continually develop these skills. And students are really challenged to be adaptable. So they have to think about, how would this skill or how would this knowledge that I learned in this context fit in this new context? And that's another hallmark of an integrative learning success story. Another thing that integrative learning can do when we do it well is help students understand and develop their purpose, their values, and their ethics. So we're really helping students develop the personal and the professional. And again, it goes beyond the educational experience into that student's civic life, which is something that's absolutely critical for all of us that are engaged in this type of work. So from us at AAC&U, we really believe that integrative learning is essential, because as we know, and we have learned over the past few months, many of us knew this before, but the world is rapidly changing, and we have to be able to adapt and apply what we have learned into many different situations. So I think one of the things I'll say before we move to the next topic is that when you think about integrative learning, it's about connectivity. It's about connections. I want to think about how many of you have already created or offered students an integrative assignment. So I want you to think about what an integrative assignment would look like. So with integrative learning, the key is making sure students have an opportunity to provide evidence of their integrative thinking, right? So we can say, yes, we've given them the opportunities, but what is the evidence? What type of activity? Did they do a critical reflection? What was the activity? So we're wanting to think about creating assignments where students are making clear connections between the formal learning, if you will, in the classroom, to what they're learning in their own communities, or what they're learning when you have them out at a field experience, if that's part of your curriculum, what they're learning in their co-curricular or extracurricular activities, so that students see that thread from all of their spaces of learning. And the goal, when integrative learning is done well, is that the entire educational experience is tied together and students can see those connections. And those barriers that we have often talked about are broken down. So when you look at what we have is I think, could you put the high five if you have ever heard of an AAC&U value rubric? A rubric. So just a high five, okay? So AAC&U, we've developed a series of valid assessment of learning of undergraduate education. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I see. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing more. And so we have a number of rubrics on different topics, but one is an integrative learning rubric, and I believe that link is on the handout that that will be shared with you. And I just wanted to share, before we move on to the second story, is what those elements are. When you look at the dimensions of that rubric, one, connections to experience. So students are able to make connections of their experience with their academic knowledge, as I said before. So that's one area that you can assess. Secondly, that students are able to make connections to their discipline. So yes, integrative learning is about bringing things together, but you do have to make sure students understand the connections in your discipline as well. So how are they able to make connections to their discipline, to other disciplines and other perspectives? The third thing, and this was in the chat as well, is transfer, that students are able to adapt and apply those skills, theories, and methodologies gained in one situation to another situation. And then fourth, that there's reflection and self-assessment. So students have time to think about what this means. There was a small, I don't know if you all are into basketball, so I'm not going to dwell on basketball, and tennis is my second, but I don't know if many of you saw, there was a nice little video after the Lakers won the national championship, you know, the NBA the other night. And it was about a 20-second video of Anthony Davis. And he went from looking very serious to becoming overcome with emotion, tearing up and putting his hand in a towel. And someone put self-reflection the moment he realized he was a champion. And so sometimes we don't take the time to reflect on those things, but it's critical that we have our students take the time to self-reflect on those experiences so they can understand, that's what's happening. I may have been so focused on getting done, going to work, doing this next task, but we need to make sure that they have a time for self-reflection. And so you can find those dimensions that I just mentioned on our value rubric. The last thing on this story I will add is the National Academies did a project on integrative learning, and Lynn Pasquarella, the president of AAC&U, was one of the members of the committee. And one of the taglines, if you will, was all disciplines are branches of the same tree. And the idea, of course, is that we are all together and we should come together so that students don't get so distracted that they think, oh, I can only do science. So any questions or comments on what is integrative learning? And then we're going to look at some principles and practices. Okay, good. Some gave examples dealing with ethical issues in healthcare. Wonderful. Discussions and writing. Okay, hands-on learning. Okay, excellent. And thank you for putting the rubric link in there, Randall. I appreciate that. So now the second story is going to be the principles and practices of integrative learning. So at AAC&U, we've been doing this work for many years. Before I arrived at AAC&U, I had colleagues that were doing this work on integrative learning. And so we worked with institutions of all types to figure out what integrative learning is. What does it look like? And so one of the things that was developed several years ago was a publication that identified 6 principles and practices of integrative learning. And so I want to go over these principles briefly and then share a few examples and then see some examples from your experience, or you'll have time to discuss that later. And there is overlap between these areas, which is something that I think you'll notice. So the first principle of integrative learning is that integrative learning develops the whole student. It lays the groundwork for personal growth, as I mentioned earlier, economic productivity, and responsible citizenship. So again, it's all of those areas, not just one academic area. And through the opportunities that we provide students across their experience and the guidance that we share, they're able to make sense of the world and their place in it. Now, the practice that has been shared as an example in a number of publications is how curriculum is designed, and that there isn't an expectation that a student can do everything at once, but the idea that over time, students are able to do things at progressively higher levels. It's common sense, right? We all do this. We develop a scaffolding for students. And so many things like pathways, thematic programs, capstones, where we provide students with opportunities to work independently and also collaboratively. So it may be a foundational experience where we say, okay, in this course, students are going to have a foundational experience for civic learning. So we're going to have them do a self-assessment of what is civic learning. Maybe we'll have students do a community engaged project. So it's a one-off. They go one day, they come back, they talk about it. That would be foundational. At the developmental level, they're going to work a little bit higher. They're going to think about this differently. Their writing assignment may be different. They may be asked to do a little bit more. Then you would have a culminating experience. So this could be within a particular course as you're developing it, or it could be over the entire experience. So you're looking at the beginning of a student's educational experience with you to the end of the educational experience. So that culminating experience could be a signature work project. It could be a capstone where students are working with that same community organization and now they're taking leadership on a particular project that's appropriate. It could be an internship, but it's where students have had the time to engage and understand, and they've been given the skills so that they can continue to advance their learning. And so that is part of the holistic development of the students. Okay, excellent. Number 2, addressing complex issues through problem-based inquiry. And I'm not going to spend a long time on this because I know you have Chris Wobie coming and she will talk a lot about project-based learning, but I just want to focus that the key is students need an opportunity to attempt to tackle unscripted problems and challenges. And so this again can be a variety of types of work when you look at the practice. It can be student-centered where students are individually or working with others to try to solve problems. You want to make sure that students are looking at higher order skills of thinking as they're doing this, and there can be an inquiry-based product or assignment where it's open-ended. Students look at a problem, engage in higher order thinking to figure out how to solve it, describe the background, articulate the importance in the global context, and move on. We've seen students who have done this with climate change projects of a wide variety. We've seen this with housing insecurity. We've seen this with homelessness and other dimensions. So can you think of any, or have you done some inquiry-based projects that you want to put in the chat so that others may see some work that you have done that would be considered problem-based inquiry? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Natasha. Undergraduate research. Okay, and I see the part, getting students to realize that feelings count. Yes, that is something that's important, and we have to articulate that to them so they understand we get that. And it's a holistic approach. Thank you for that. Okay, all right. I'm going to move on to number 3. So number 3 is integrating the curricular, the co-curricular, and community experiences. And this is something I'm sure that you are all doing in your work in the civic landscape. And this principle is that there should be logical and transparent connections between all of these, among the curricular, the co-curricular, and the community. And there can be a number of ways for you to practice this and provide opportunities for your students. So I'm going to give you one quick example of something that, as was mentioned prior to my coming to AAC&U, I was at IUPUI. And one of the things that I did is I had a community-based global learning project in Kenya. And our students did a great deal of reading, obviously, as part of the course. They also attended lectures in Kenya with faculty from Moi University, a sister university, and the students were engaged in service learning projects at different locations. So I had some students that were working on a farm. That farm was connected to a broader healthcare project that was originally started with HIV. And what they found is a number of the folks in the community that received the ARVs as part of this project didn't have enough food to eat. They were giving their food to their children in many cases. And so what they decided is they needed a food element to this program. So some people that were part of the program could then volunteer and work at the farm. And then anyone, when they came in to get their medical prescription, they got a prescription for food. So my students would work there and they'd say, okay, your family of 10, here's your cooking oil, here's your maize, here are your greens, that kind of thing. So the students were working in that environment. So as a result of that course, the students were able to think about what they'd read, to think about the lectures that they had been a part of at the university with Kenyan scholars. So they knew that knowledge wasn't only crafted and created in the US context. And then they were able to draw on experiences from people at their service sites. So they were able to make those connections between all those dimensions. And so that's one thing that we think about when we're talking about connecting this work. Another thing, the work that you are doing with Pathways is another great example in terms of how you help students see you're participating in this project and that also connects to your learning. Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of examples in the chat. Thank you, Kimberly. Persuasive speech, where they research a local problem, work with the nonprofit, convince us to support the organization. Excellent. So they're making those connections. No, there's no visual right now. Okay, another one is taking students arts, performing and fine arts, very good, put on hold because of COVID and not able to move forward. And some of our partners in the arts that I've seen that I have worked with and that folks I'm working with at universities, some are looking at trying to do some virtual activities with the arts. There was a theater in London, actually the Old Vic Theater, they did a production that was streamed around the world. And I knew of one institution where they were able to get their students, they still had some of the funding from the student activity fees, and it was a modest fee, and they were able to have their students participate in that. So we're seeing a lot of creativity in terms of how we can still do these activities during COVID. The last thing I want to share with this example is also preparation for careers and how we can help students see the connections between the activities that they're engaging with that connect their communities, that connect their coursework and other work to their careers. Making sure that students can articulate clearly what they've done and how it transfers to the workplace. There was a student in the health sciences that colleagues out of Chicago, a couple of universities in Chicago and two-year colleges, it was a partnership, I was working with them. And one of the students was interested in a nursing program and had started a nursing program. And she had raised with some of the people at her internship site, this is something that is not uncommon, that it was really uncomfortable for many women from different religious traditions to undrape all at once, to undress all at once. And so she talked with some folks there about, is it possible to perhaps only uncover this part, cover up, uncover, and yes, that would involve more time with the healthcare providers in the facility, but it might put some of the patients at ease. And that was something that this particular clinic actually adopted. And so when she was able then to enter the workforce, she was able to talk about what she had learned in her different experiences, and she was able to clearly articulate that how that experience in the field connected to what she had learned about cultural humility and sensitivity, and then it impacted her environment. So number 4, if you're counting, number 4 is assessing and documenting student learning. So this is something that we all do, is try to figure out how we are going to assess students in integrative learning. And with this, we want to make sure that students have ongoing ways to demonstrate, to show us what learning they are gaining and what types of opportunities those are. So many have gone the route of e-portfolio. How many of you just do a high five or a thumbs up if you are using e-portfolios at your institution? Because that's something that some have been using. Okay, I see a couple of nods. Okay, so e-portfolio is one. Okay, I see some others. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Okay. And so that's one example where you are making sure that students are providing resources and materials that show you and tell you what documents it is they're working on, and you can see the production. Number 5, enhancing learning through practical application. So again, that students are in the field in some way, they are applying this learning. So it isn't just learning all the information about a particular environment, but where they're actually able to do something new. This allows for student creativity. This allows for students adaptivity. And this is just a wonderful opportunity for students to highlight and show their integrative learning. One example I'll give you, and this has happened during COVID-19, and this is from Bard College, and they have a project called Thrive on Kingston. And so Kingston is a community where there were a number of people that were housing insecure. And so what the students did, they were enrolled in a class called Hudson Valley City's Environmental Injustice course. And so they were learning about environmental issues. And then they started talking about local issues and issues in their region. And so they started partnering with a community organization called Beyond Four Walls, and they started creating Kingston kits where they were able to raise funds in their community. They worked with this organization to identify items. And instead of the traditional items, blankets, sanitary napkins, they started working on collecting PPE for people and masks and other things that were in high demand at the time. And so again, this came out of a course, but the students said, we want to do something bigger than just talk about these issues. We want to have a tangible activity. So that's an example of the practical application. Let's see if there's any comments. Okay, excellent, thank you. And cultural humility definitely guided the work that Bart has done and that many others do. And we can talk about that a bit later as well. Thank you. The last one for story 2 is promoting inclusive excellence and equitable outcomes. And this is the one that I think is very important. And I think many institutions now, as they are looking at what practices they can engage in to make sure that institutions are being more inclusive, is one that I think it's important to talk about, and making sure that there are ways for students all across the institution to participate in these practices. So how are we making sure, how do we first look and see who isn't participating in these integrative learning opportunities? So do we only offer them for students that are in a special program? How do we make sure that more students can become a part of that special program? Or how do we integrate this integrative learning opportunity across the board so more students have an opportunity? And the solution that many have offered is looking at integrating high impact practices. And so the high impact practices, of course, are practices that have been researched and they've shown that students perform better. There's higher rates of student success for all students, but particularly for new majority students. So students of color, students from lower resources, first generation students, there's a lot of data that supports their development and their work. And we have to think about how we can engage those students. So those are the 6 practices and a few examples. Did anyone have any other examples they wanted to share with us? I love that you've been sharing them throughout, but any other examples or types of integrative learning elements that you have been engaging in that touch on any of those 4 or 6 principles? Okay. All right. So I think one thing, yes, I think one thing it could be clear that with integrative learning, you can see that global learning is integrative learning. And so we want to spend a bit of time about talking a little bit. I think I have about 8 minutes to talk about global learning, maybe 5 minutes. Patty will tell me if it's 8 minutes or less. But I want to talk, okay, perfect. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about global learning. And especially some are saying global learning now, why? And what I want to do again is do another quick poll from you and see and share some data that has been collected about global learning. So one of the first things I want to show you is this image here. Now this is also from the Chicago Council, so I wanted to show this to you. And this says 7 in 10 respondents, so 68% of those polled, said that taking an active part in world affairs will benefit the future of the country. And so you can see that that number has gone up and down over the years, but now it is a high number. And if the US is going to take an active part in world affairs, we have to be aware of world affairs. Students have to know about world affairs. It's not just the leadership that needs to know, but students also need to have knowledge. The other thing that came out of this report that I want to share is that majorities of Americans preferred a shared leadership role for the United States. Many of you have heard people say before, the US can't be the world's police. We should be part of shared leadership. So you can see 24% preferred dominant leadership role, 7% said no leadership, but 54% said they should be more involved in addressing global issues as we should be as a country, and 25% said the status quo. So either way, it's important that our students are equipped with global knowledge and global skills because we are a part of the world, no matter what role our government decides to play. We are a part of the globe. And it's not a situation where we can just say we're not going to be a part of this. So this one, I'm going to ask you again to be a little bit interactive. Oh yes, Wissam, we'll talk about what that means involved. Good point. Now, when I say global learning, just go ahead and in the chat, drop in what you think that means when I say global learning. So if someone came to you and said, we're going to start doing global learning at the college, what would you think they meant you were going to do? Okay, learn about other cultures. Okay, thank you. Issues that concern all humanity, understanding and sharing with the world. Good. Experiences of other peoples and cultures. Very good. Critically analyze global systems. Good. Interact with others. Read international literature, learn languages, don't focus on yourself. Okay, learning to be part of the world order. Okay, our students are often from immigrant families. Yes, it's a natural interest that we can often then embrace and show the students that their lived experiences are part of our curricula. Learning to work together and respect each other, bring world issues, understanding that local problems reflect global issues. Thank you. And that's exactly it. And so again, it's a lot like integrative learning. Is as an institution, you have to decide and think about, what does global learning mean to us? Now, for some people, they may say global learning means cultural immersion. It only counts if we go in the community and we're immersed with the community. Some people think about education abroad. Some people think about intercultural competence, intercultural knowledge. Others say global perspectives. We're going to learn about perspectives from different people around the world. Other people say global citizenship. That was perfect timing, Graciela. Global citizenship. What does that mean to be a citizen of the world, moving about the world, having that knowledge and ability to do these things? Others talk about global. I don't know if you remember, maybe 10 years ago in the US, a lot of people like that term global to describe global and local. But there are a lot of things to think about. But the big thing is to think about, just like integrative learning, what do you want your students to be able to do? And you hit the head on a lot of it with the things that you shared. You want students to make connections from local to global. You want students to be able to collaborate. You want students to recognize that there are things beyond their own backyard. And then I think I love the point about this, that you have students that are already inherently aware of those things. And so the last thing I want to share with you, and this is just a teaser for what will come when we spend more time on global engagement, is the global learning value rubric. And I like to share this with folks because it gives 6 dimensions of global learning that I'll just touch on. But I think they are very important, and you'll see how well they connect to integrative learning. So the first is global self-awareness. So this speaks to some of the points that were made in the chat, so that students understand the interrelationship across the world, across the globe, between themselves, between their local community, between global communities, and between the natural and physical world. So we're thinking about how we interact with our climate as well. The second is perspective taking. So pushing students to think about things from a variety of perspectives, not just their own, and helping students realize how their own perspective could limit what they understand and what they think about the rest of the world. And so the goal is for students to be able to draw on these different perspectives as they engage in their academic work, as they engage in their personal lives, as they engage as citizens. The next is cultural diversity. And when we talk about cultural diversity from a global learning perspective, we're not just talking about diversity in the US context, but we're talking about global diversity. So as someone noted, we have students who are coming from all over the world at our institutions. We have students who come from different faith traditions, students who don't have faith traditions. But how do we unpack and understand how the local environment can be reflective of this broad diversity? Or if you're working and living in an environment that you may say, oh, it's not very diverse, but peeling back the onion and seeing that there is diversity, even sometimes when you don't see it, and understanding the hierarchies that come out of that, those communities. The next, personal and social responsibility. Obviously, this is what is your responsibility to your community. This is at the heart of civic dialogues. What is it that we should be doing? What is my role as a member of my community, as a citizen? Am I to vote? Am I to participate in a local level? I live in Washington, D.C. We don't have senators. we have what are called ANC. So we have local leaders in different areas, we have wards, but what is my role if I think about it from a political perspective, or if I think about it from others? Next, global systems, again, the way systems interact. And then finally, the application of knowledge. And that speaks again to what we talked about with integrative learning. And the last thing I want to close with are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And just if you could, by a show of hands again, clicking that little button, let me know how many of you are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so we got a few nods. Okay, so 2015, thank you. Okay, I see a few. 2015, the United Nations shifted. Thanks, Christine, I see you. The UN shifted from having goals that were most applicable to lower income and middle income countries to goals that were applicable across the board. So things like eradicating poverty, clean water, doing away with hunger, all of these things became tangible, and there are ways for all of us to get involved. And we'll spend more time talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals in the next workshop. But the thing I wanted to raise with this is that there is a way for all of us to enter when we look at things from the UN Sustainable Development Goals perspective. We can look at poverty from our own local community. We can look at poverty from a global perspective. We can look at what different countries are doing. And it pushes us to think about things from a broader perspective than just our own. And it makes us sometimes, it opens things up to finding better answers to the problems when we're willing to look broader for the solutions to our problems. So with that, I believe my time is up and we're ready for Q&A. But I hope you were able to see the thread that I tried to make between integrative and global learning, because I think they go well together. So thank you.
And Dr. Whitehead, thank you. This has been great. And again, this is just a little teaser. Remember, Dawn is coming back and she's going to be doing a 2-hour workshop. So we'll really do that deep dive and get into all of these topics in more detail. And then also, for those of you who aren't as familiar with the 17 Sustainable Goals, really to spend more time looking at those goals as well, because something to really think in terms of whether you're talking about a classroom or a department or even a campus, taking this on as an initiative to really be committed to looking at those goals. So questions. Let's see here. And Kimberly, if you see something that I'm missing, jump in here.
Will do.
Go ahead and put your questions in the chat. So I see Pia's wait. She's looking forward to the workshop, definitely. Any specific questions that you have? When is the workshop? We'll talk about that next hour. It's going to be November, and I'm trying to remember, Dawn, forgive me. I know Chris is coming. Are you the 6th or the 13th? I get you guys mixed up.
I believe the 13th.
So we're going to have Chris will be on the 6th, and then Dawn will be coming on the 13th. And again, next week, Chris Wilby and Rick Voss are going to be talking about project-based learning, and you're going to see there's a really nice overlap between project-based learning and integrative learning. So that's why having these two presentations back to back is going to be so helpful when you have the deep dive with project-based learning, and then also integrative learning and global awareness when Dawn comes back. So Randall asked a question: if you were new to education and you were seeking to sell the integrative learning concept to a campus culture, what overall approach might you use? And that's a great question.
Thanks, Randall. I think the number one, well, two things. One I would use is look at what situation we're in right now. So we're really struggling with the pandemic. And one of the things that we have seen, and I've seen this written in several different places, is that some countries are going it alone, some countries are working together, but universities and scientific researchers are working together. And that is going to be the key to getting out of this pandemic. And I think that type of global cooperation and that type of applied learning demonstrate the power of integrative learning, is that we have to have students engaged in activities where they are applying what they're learning and they're not just gaining knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And this is someone who loves reading and just learning, but we have to make a connection to work. We have to make a connection to life. Two, when you look at what's happening, and I'm not sure about your communities, I live in Washington, D.C., and things are as polarized here as you might imagine, but in different ways. And I think that's another thing that integrative learning does, is it challenges students to see themselves and to see society. And it forces students, if we do integrative learning well, to realize that we have to learn to collaborate. We have to talk to each other. We have to work with people in different contexts. And I think that's something else that is helpful. And then lastly, is the workforce piece. And when you look at what employers want, and I'm sure you all have looked repeatedly at the NACE competencies, and one of the NACE competencies is intercultural. I'm going to get it. I want to read the proper. I always just say it off the fly. But one of the NACE competencies is global and intercultural fluency. You also, when you look at the NACE competencies, they talk about critical thinking and problem solving, and that's what integrative learning does. We also have a number of folks that are doing employer surveys, and what they want is they want students that are able to come in and do the work, not students who are able to come in and say, oh, well, I've heard of that theory before. I was at an event, and the head of, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I believe was Pierre Tires, and he said that when they come in, they want students that can say how they have collaborated with other people. How have you worked with other people? How have you engaged with other people? They don't want to ask the students, do you think you'll be able to work together? No, they want to know, give me an example of a time when you worked with someone to solve a problem. And that's what integrative learning does. So I think that's the case that I would make. And I think it comes on citizenship, on the workforce, and on our individual personal development. Oh, it's a good question, Suzanne.
Yeah, Suzanne
Yeah.
says, I have found the institution to be less ready and eager for integrative learning to happen, and the students more ready. I haven't been able to effectively address that challenge.
Yeah, I'll give you one quick example, and I don't know that this will be a solution, and this is a very different type of institution, perhaps, Midwest. So there was a team 2 summers ago at our Integrative Learning and Signature Work Summer Institute from the University of Michigan, Flint. And it was a team that came, and they had been working for 2 years on doing integrative learning. And it was an interdisciplinary team that had folks from 6 different departments and schools. And little by little, they were able to do some pilot work to show the impact of this. And they were able to get a little bit of funding from the institution. And little by little, they're making progress with expanding the coalition of the willing, if you will. And they feel like they have made some progress. It's still not across the whole institution, but it's grown. And so that's an example of a grassroots effort, but you really do need some kind of champion if you're really going to be able to pull this off, because you need the professional development for faculty to engage, and they have to buy into it. But going from sort of the grassroots, University of Michigan Flint is one specific example that I can think of that has done it a little bit of a different way.
See, we can. There was something else I was just going to mention too in response to what you just said, Dawn. Actually, 2 things. I know when you were going back with what employers are looking for, so much of this work really coincides with those 21st century skills or professional skills of communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. And there's such an overlap. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, you just made note of the Institute on Integrative Learning that you have been a part of for several years. And just as an FYI, we at College of the Canyons were fortunate enough to be able to participate this summer in this institute, and it was absolutely fantastic. And so there will be, I'm guessing, come probably, I think around the 1st of the year, the announcement for applications. And so if this is something that any of you are interested in, please keep your eyes and ears open. And I know Don will probably talk more about this with the workshop, but it's a great way to form a team, have that team get this just hands-on, deep dive kind of knowledge in working in a very intensive kind of environment for 5, I believe, almost 5 days straight. And so again, something to keep in mind. And all of these kinds of things will go in, you know, the participants go into much more detail, but this is a great way to learn more. But I'm curious if you could just go back and reflect, maybe again, how does this all relate to those 21st century skills? And I know you've talked a little bit about it, but maybe to elaborate again.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand, as you alluded, because when you are talking about the practices and the examples of making sure that students have opportunities to apply the learning, when you're thinking about how are they applying it, they're applying it by using and drawing on critical thinking. They're applying and drawing by thinking about intercultural competence. So I think you can go down the list of those 21st century skills and think about, when I'm creating these practical experiences for students, which of these skills do I want them to be able to do, or which of these skills do I want them to demonstrate? And so I think when you look at the types of assignments that you're designing for the integrative learning, you can I say easily, but I don't mean very easily, not magical, but you can easily say, okay, of these skills, these are the 3 that are going to be foregrounded in my course or in this experience. And you can say, okay, if I want to make sure students are able to demonstrate this skill, how do I structure the activity? Who are they working with? And so I think it comes back to, like many things, assignment design. And when you look at over the program or the course, when you look at what skills are, where are the skills that students need over the course of that experience? So I think curriculum mapping plays a part, but it also comes down to, in this course, I know for me, when I was teaching, we had what were called principles of undergraduate learning, and we had 5. And I had to clarify which 3 were the foregrounded 3 in my course, and I had to make connections to those assignments and those activities. And I think you do the same thing with these 21st century skills and competencies, is that you lay them out in terms of how and when students will have an opportunity to engage and use them.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one last question. How can one be involved with the UN effort on sustainability overseas? I've given up on America.
Yeah, there are a lot of there are a lot of ways to get involved. If you go to the UN, and I can send this to Patty and Kim a little bit later, or Rebecca, there's a website that is focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you can easily go to that website and see different projects or activities that are going on. SUNY, the State University of New York, they have developed, now this is US and international, so I don't know if you'd want to reach out to them, but SUNY has been developing courses guided by the UN SDGs. And so we're finding that people all over the world are using these as anchors or as just other ways to organize their interdisciplinary work or their integrative learning work. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to get involved, and I'll send that link as well.
And I would just mention something in just related to that. Bob Franco at, I'm never pronounce this correctly, Kalapalani Community College in Hawaii. He has been working in this field in sustainability for years, and they have actually used or are embedding the sustainable goals throughout their entire curriculum, their campus, and so he would definitely be someone to connect with if you're interested in learning more about how they're doing that at the community college in Hawaii. Again, if you Google Bob Franco or Robert Franco, you should be able to get a link to find him quickly. If not, you can let us know and we'll give you an email